Finland successfully ended homelessness, and I want to know how. Germany kind of did this a little bit, and I want to see if the system is similar. So, subscribe.
About 600,000 people experience homelessness in the U.S.
You see them all over the place. It's crazy.
Think about your own life. You might not be homeless, or necessarily even know someone who is or has been. But you certainly know someone paying too much for rent. Someone having trouble finding a place to live.
The housing market right now is nutty. I'm actually a landlord myself, and I think out of all the homes in my area that have rent and whatnot, mine's one of the cheapest. Not advertising or anything, but I'm saying like I don't pay, like I think I pay a little under what the market value is for houses for rent right now, and rent has skyrocketed all over the country, and I'm pretty sure worldwide.
Someone facing eviction. In other words, someone who could become homeless without much needing to go wrong. More and more Americans are joining this category every day.
It's nuts.
The truth is that in 90...
Like what you just saw right there in that scene is what, like Chicago is painted with people that are literally all over the place, like homeless, man. It's sad. It's very sad. And then, I would encourage people watching this video to actually sit down one day and have a conversation with a person who is homeless and ask them how they got there. One of the things that my aunt wound up doing to me when I was a kid, I was like, I got in arguments with my mom all the time and whatnot. And then my aunt, she took me to the side. She put me in front of a homeless man, gave him $20. She told him she would give him $20 if he told me his story. And when you see how a lot of these people got to where they are, it's insane.
The truth is that in 95% of U.S. counties, those who work a full-time minimum wage job cannot afford even a one-bedroom apartment.
True that.
Change that to a two-bedroom, and the entire country becomes unaffordable.
Join the military, man. It's a good gig. I'm in the military right now, and it's done wonders for my life. I would encourage anybody that is at least in the United States to join the military, man. It's one of the best options you have unless you have a better one.
This situation is only getting worse. As a result
Tent cities. We have tent cities all over the place.
of the pandemic, rising housing costs, wage stagnation, and the inadequate policies of our local and federal governments, the number of people experiencing homelessness and of people on the brink has been steadily growing for the past decade. That is, if you only look at the U.S. In this episode, we're looking at Finland's approach to homelessness, what Housing First is, and what it could mean for the American economy.
Wow.
In Finland, only about 5,000 people, 0.1% of the population, are homeless.
Wow.
And that's even with the broadest definition of what constitutes homelessness, which includes more than who you typically think of when you hear the term. The Finnish definition of homelessness goes beyond just those who are living on the street or in emergency accommodations like shelters.
It probably extends to the people who don't have like a physical fixed location.
In some cities, like the country's capital, Helsinki,
This is beautiful, by the way.
no one sleeps on the street.
Wow.
That type of homelessness has been completely eliminated.
Wow.
Compare that to the U.S.'s nearly 600,000 homeless people, which is almost exclusively so-called rough sleepers, those who live on the street, and the problem starts to become apparent.
Also, I think there could be rules that are in Finland that, prevent people from sleeping in the streets. Like, okay, you literally can't sleep here, bro. Like, go somewhere else. Like, we will get you up out of here. We do not want you on these streets. They do try to do that in a lot of American states, but people sleep on the streets anyways, and they're kind of like, might as well not bother them, bro.
What's more important, though, is that homelessness isn't just low in Finland, it's actively going down.
Wow, that's
Between
insane.
2010 and 2018, Finland enjoyed a massive 40% decline in the homelessness rate.
What?
If it sounds like we're cherry
That's
picking
crazy.
data, even during the pandemic, which, let me remind you, has caused a massive surge of homelessness in the U.S., homelessness in Finland did not increase.
What?
So, what happened? How is Finland so effectively reducing homelessness?
I would like to know.
In 2007, the Finnish government started a national Housing First program.
What?
Housing First is a philosophy that argues that to make progress on homelessness, particularly chronic homelessness, you need more than temporary emergency solutions. You
That's
need permanent
insane,
housing
dude. What the
right out the gate. In other words, housing is the starting point, not the end point.
Wow.
The way Housing First programs work is pretty simple. People experiencing homelessness receive independent housing immediately, without having to first fulfill mental health, sobriety, income, employment, or other requirements. Once they're housed, support services are offered, not imposed, and over time, the newly housed begin to finance part of the cost of their housing to the degree that they can afford it.
okay. So it's not like they're just giving out free houses. They're like, hey, at first, boom, here's a place you can stay at. They wait till you get up on your feet and they're like, all right, now here's what you need to do. Like, you need to pay at least a little bit of a fee so you can stay here, get a job of some sort. That's kind of how a lot of these programs work. America has a welfare system that kind of sort of works like this, but it's a lot more harsh and more cutthroat. Germany has a system like this, and that's a lot more easier. It's a lot easier for people to be a part of a system like that. However, there are people who still struggle to be a part of it. In Finland, I feel like it's a lot easier to be a part of something like this.
It sounds pretty intuitive, but this is very different from the more common continuum of care or staircase approach we're mostly using. In continuum of care programs, homeless people are expected to make progress on any mental health or addiction issues they may have, and to pass a certain standard before being housed.
Oh, okay. They don't just give you the house then. I'm messing that all the way up.
In this system, housing is at the top of the staircase. These individual changes that these programs require are the sorts of things that are incredibly difficult to address when you are still contending with the anxiety of not having a home, possibly still sleeping on the street. In these continuum of care programs, only once you have demonstrated some change, which we should keep in mind is incredibly difficult to achieve without housing stability, do these programs graduate you into housing arrangements.
And that makes sense. That makes sense.
First, shared housing, and slowly over time, independent housing. To some, continuum of care approaches sound great. That is, in theory. They map onto our society's values of meritocracy, of security. Only those who are deserving get access to the prize of having a home. Under this mentality, if you don't have a home, it must be because you're just not good enough yet. Come back later. It should be obvious that these programs just don't work. Not only do they strip people of their agency and come with an enormous moral burden, but recidivism is high and a huge number of people don't make it into the program in the first place because of the high barrier to entry.
Yep.
Compare that to Housing First. In the initial study on Housing First, back in 2003, a randomized trial of the two approaches decidedly shows the strength of the new program. Around half of the initially homeless group were accepted into permanent housing, regardless of their eligibility according to other programs.
That is insane. I mean, to compare that to, America and stuff like that, dude. Like, that's, America got issues, my guy. That's all I can say.
And they were then offered tailored and optional care for their individual circumstances. The other half went through conventional channels. And at the end of the trial, the results were clear. The Housing First group spent more time in stable housing, less time hospitalized, and results carried over for longer than when homeless people went through the continuum of care path.
Wow.
Within just 6 months, Housing First had virtually eliminated homelessness in the experimental group. It was a massive success.
That's insane, and we should apply that here.
That first study was in New York, and inspired by its promising results, the EU ran its own pilot programs in 5 European countries with the same outcome.
That's pretty cool. Like, that was in New York. So New York already implied it, I guess?
Secure, long-term housing stability. And now that it's become the official national policy of the Finnish government, we've seen just how much good this can achieve. It is abundantly clear that this approach works. Despite all of this, some of you might still be skeptical. Forget for a second that housing is a universal right we are all entitled to, that it is baked into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the US has signed onto and agreed to provide in front of the entire international community. Forget that this right doesn't include temporary shelters, but only real, stable housing, and that there are metrics around accessibility.
Wow, I had no idea there was like an international clause like that. This is my first time learning about something like that.
Affordability, discrimination, and protection from eviction, which good Housing First programs conform to perfectly, in addition to affirming.
Look how, bro, the streets just be looking a little, oof. Good gosh. And it's unfortunate because people don't have places to go, so they have to do this.
The basic idea of being decent to real human people. You might still wonder about costs in the wealthiest country in the world that regularly provides housing subsidies mostly to the wealthiest people in the country through mortgage interest tax deductions costing the American people, $70 billion a year, or close to 25 times what is set aside for homelessness programs at the federal level. Imagine all that incredibly important stuff doesn't matter. It's gone. Forget about it. Housing first is still cheaper than not housing people or walking them through an ineffective continuum of care program.
Wow.
Not only are people housed through Housing First covering part of the cost and are more easily employed, but housing people saves money in the long term.
That makes sense. Think about this, right? You house people, they get they get cleaned up and all that other good stuff. They can present themselves in a marketable fashion to be hired at some job location. Whereas if you're homeless, you don't have necessarily the tools at your disposal to keep up with your hygiene and your care, your self-care, so that you are able to present yourself in a way that is marketable and desirable for companies to hire you on. So once you're in a state where you're like on the street for real, bro, it's going to be real hard to get out of that situation. It's not impossible, because there are a lot of people that have been able to pull themselves out of that, but it is very difficult.
On comparatively costly emergency hospitalization bills and absurdly expensive policing, which both go down when 1. People's needs are taken care of preventatively, and 2. They aren't exposed to an expensive state apparatus that has criminalized existing without a house. Given all this evidence, you're probably wondering, why aren't we doing this? To be fair, there are some small-scale examples of this in the U.S. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development does fund certain homelessness programs.
And the standards of getting in there are a little higher than you would expect.
Some of them with the Housing First methods. However, these programs are only robust in a few cities and states. But no matter the nature of the program, whether it's Housing First, Continuum of Care, or something else, funding is far too low. The HUD's budget and municipal aid funds have steadily declined over time.
Because people care less and less about anybody else but themselves. So you have situations like this where there are people who genuinely need help and they can't get it because they aren't being funded, and it's sad.
And as a result, programs scrape together a budget from the general public and several different local and federal funds.
Hey, Mr. B should look into this, man. I know he donates to charities and stuff, but I feel like people can benefit directly from this. Great.
Rarely ever amounting to what they actually need to provide effective services. But the main problem behind all of this isn't that homelessness programs aren't getting enough funding. That is an issue just a little further down the line. The underlying problem is affordable housing, and at the core of that problem is our capitalist organization of the economy. Under a capitalist economy, housing isn't treated like the right it's considered to be by most nations, including, on paper, the United States.
Jesus.
Instead, it's a commodity.
Yeah, exactly. In the U.S., it's not like a requirement that every citizen has a home. It's an expectation that people get themselves a home at some point, but it's not a requirement. And, they see it as almost a privilege to have a home. It's like, oh, you're privileged to have a home. If you don't have a home, then, well, that's too bad for you. Keep it pushing, Chief. It's sad.
Something to be traded, speculated on, turned for a profit. That is the main goal of housing in a commodity market. Not putting people in homes, making money.
You know what I realized? We see people holding up homeless signs and stuff, right? The first thing that I hear a lot of people saying is like, yo, they need to get up off their lazy butts and go and like apply for jobs and whatnot. And then part of me thinks, what if they have already done that? Like, what if they do that every single day? They're applying for jobs. They're making the best use out of all their time. They apply for jobs. They're actively searching for new jobs and whatnot. And they're in between time, like their resting time, they're outside with a sign saying, hey, this is my situation. I'm homeless. Any bit of money can help. And so it's them like constantly being on the grind, right? They're outside in between looking for jobs and stuff like that, and searching for new opportunities and sharpening their skills, with a sign, and hopefully someone with a good heart comes by and blesses them with something. Now, I do know that that's not everybody, but there could be a few people out there that are like that. It's something that's crossed my mind. It's interesting.
As a result, developers, investors, and the like don't focus their energy on housing the poor, from whom they can only extract so much, but rather on building luxury accommodations for the wealthy, leaving largely empty units across the country only rarely occupied, if at all. While people in desperate need of housing are refused access and subjected to a manufactured housing scarcity. On top of that, there is a very real incentive for capitalists to only partially resolve homelessness. The threat of losing the roof over your head keeps even the most exploited worker in a job they hate.
Yep.
Increasingly, that threat forces people into even more dire conditions as wages become less and less sufficient to cover housing costs.
It's nuts, bro. I've always thought of like plan A, B, and C, right? I can't be in the military forever. So I know when I get out, I have to be on point. I have to like, okay, well, what's my job, dude? Like, what am I going to be doing? Fortunately, like what I do now allows me to work a job where I'm able to get paid very well when I get out. But in case that doesn't work, because you never know what'll happen, right? I have a thing in my head where I'm like, I will always have an avenue to work 2 to 3 jobs. I will work myself to the bone to make sure that I have a good income, because you can still work, multiple jobs and whatnot and get multiple W-2s and all that other good stuff. You just have to put in the work, bro. Like you can apply. I've done it before. You'll secure a couple jobs. Hopefully you can get the hours to correspond with different locations. And then that's what you do. You work your butt off. Like I would be doing the social media thing, but I would also be working 3 jobs on top of that to make sure that I'm, doing what I got to do to provide what I got to provide, man. Like you gotta have a work ethic, a crazy work ethic to survive in this world, man.
Forcing people to take on several jobs and work untenable hours to avoid the possibility of eviction. It is not in the capitalist interest to remove that powerful, terrifying incentive. And here is where the Finnish success story may go beyond Housing First alone. Not only is Housing First doing a good job of taking people out of homelessness in a reliable way, but a social democratic organizing of the economy is limiting the extent to which people are likely to fall into it in the first place. It's still capitalism, so it still relies on somebody being exploited, in this case people in the global south, but at the very least, social democracy goes part of the way on neutering perverse capitalist incentives on continuing homelessness domestically. One key element of this is unionization. High unionization at 75% of the Finnish workforce, and therefore higher wages and higher job security than in freer markets, mean that as people exit homelessness, they are unlikely to be replaced or fall back into it themselves.
Wow.
American conservatives love to rail against Housing First, touting its failures to make significant changes in cities like Los Angeles.
It's crazy too. People that are like I guess they call them the elite, and even in like just conservatives in general, man. It's sad at what their stance is against people that are in messed up situations, because you don't know what got them there, right? I mean, yeah, you can blame it on their own choices and whatnot, and the very valid point. But I feel like the situation that they're in can impact you as an individual. They might feel the need to take from other people, whether that's lives or items and other things, and you can prevent that by providing programs and opportunities for people to also feel like they are human. They have a place to stay, some access to food, some access to water, where they don't have to live like this and feel like they're less than. It's man.
Where homelessness has continued to rise despite Housing First programs taking root. What they conveniently forget to mention is that the continuum of care programs they prefer still deliver worse results. And the core issue of the skyrocketing housing prices in the free market is why people are even pushed out into homelessness in the first place. The thing is, it doesn't have to be this way. There are solutions to reduce the scale of this issue. Earlier this year, the Gravel Institute released a great video on one of these solutions, the decommodification of housing. I'll put a link to that video and all of the sources for this one in the description. At the end of the day, the conclusion that you should take away from the Finnish case isn't just that this one type of program works really well at taking people out of an incredibly difficult situation for the benefit of everyone. It does do that, but that's not the point. The Finnish example gives us a glimpse of how we can treat housing differently. Instead of being a game for the wealthy to gamble their own fortunes and the livelihoods of millions of Americans, Housing First shows us what housing really is. A necessity. A right. It's something that must come before almost everything else. Something which we must guarantee, or fail to recognize the humanity of millions of people. If you're interested in what the future of housing might look like, I highly recommend you check out Home of the Future on CuriosityStream. It's a fascinating look at cutting-edge production methods and radically different approaches to housing than those we see today. CuriosityStream is an established streaming platform.
That's crazy. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below, because this is very deep and it hits home for a lot. I mean, I've been homeless myself, so it hits home for me for sure. And that's a driving factor for me not wanting to stop working. I want to work no matter what. I could have it all, and I would still want to work, because the fear of being homeless is very real. And the way people get treated when they are homeless it's tragic.